Kaboni Savage, a vicious, vicious dude, right? Sitting on death row. Joe Biden grants him clemency. He's no longer on death row. Where will he go? What will happen to Kaboni? We're going to get into a documentary series on all the dudes, maybe not all of them, but a lot of these dudes that were sentenced to death that now got off death row because Joe Biden granted them clemency. Let's take a look at Kaboni Savage's case, and let's talk about it at the end. President Joe Biden would use the enormous power of clemency to take Philadelphia's most dangerous drug dealer off of death row. Kaboni Savage, he would lead a regional drug trafficking operation in North Philadelphia. During the trial, it was referred to as the Kaboni Savage organization. He was the shot caller, the man that pulled the strings. The organization would distribute large quantities of controlled substance and, not surprisingly, fiercely protect its network and territory through the use of guns and violence. Threats to the organization, whether perceived or real, were quickly tamped down or extinguished with violence. Early in the Kaboni Savage operation, Kaboni took care of such threats himself. But as his power grew, his enforcers did his bidding without question. Kaboni, in the early years, would lay you down and take your life himself. Even while detained on criminal charges, Kaboni continued to manage the affairs of his organization from his prison cell. He led by retaliating against those who dared to cooperate with the government agents and prosecutors. What would make this case stand out is that Kaboni not only arranged for the murder of the prosecution's main witnesses in a murder case, in a later case, he orchestrated the firebombing of the family home of another cooperating witness in a fashion that ensured no one would survive. Eventually, Kaboni was charged with a dozen counts of murder and 8 of racketeering, among other serious offenses. The government would seek the death penalty. And in the end, the jury would order that Kaboni Savage be killed. Savage began his career in illegal drug trafficking by selling for others. By the early 1990s, he was peddling PCP on his own, operating predominantly out of his mother's house on Darien Street in North Philadelphia. Before long, he was a distributor, selling PCP in various forms as well as marijuana. He utilized numerous dealers who controlled drug corners in the vicinity of Erie Avenue in North Philadelphia. For a time, he was in a partnership distributing crack cocaine. By the late 1990s, Kaboni had come into his own. He was running everything, dealing in more than 5, 6, 7 kilos of cocaine at a time. As his cocaine sales increased, Savage began to dilute the drug and then recompress it to increase the quantity. His profit margin rose accordingly. In the early 2000s, Savage's right-hand man was Eugene Coleman. Coleman helped distribute cocaine to various individuals in the family, Savage's distribution network, and also handed proceeds from drug sales. Kaboni Savage's inner circle included enforcers who carried out Savage's commands without hesitation. Among the enforcers were Kareem Bluntly and Lamont Lewis. Although loyal to Savage for a time, Coleman and Lewis eventually would cooperate with the government prior to their respective guilty pleas in February 2004 and April 2011. Both would testify at Kaboni's trial about the operations of Kaboni's organization and its use of deadly violence. And that violence, make no mistakes, was often deadly. For example, in March 1998, when Savage was in the vicinity of the competitor, Tobias Flowers' drug corner, a driver by the name of Kenneth Lassiter accidentally bumped into Savage's car. A confrontation would ensue, and Savage demanded that Lassiter pay for the damage. Despite Lassiter's apology, Kaboni Savage pulled a gun out and shot him once. Lassiter would die from the gunshot wound. Flowers had witnessed the murder. More violence would follow. Monsieur Abdullah belonged to the Savage family, and he and the Savage would supply each other with cocaine. It was Savage who first taught Abdullah how to dilute and recompress cocaine, which eventually raised the suspicion in Savage's mind that Abdullah was overcharging him. In September 2000, Abdullah visited Savage to collect a debt, and Kaboni Savage would pay him with cash placed in a red sneaker box. He then directed Kareem Bluntly to accompany Abdullah back to his home to provide protection because of the robberies that had recently taken place. Bluntly was armed. Coleman was directed to pick up Bluntly soon after. When Coleman and Bluntly returned a half hour later, Bluntly handed Savage the red sneaker box with the cash still inside. Although Bluntly had carried out the instruction to shoot Abdul, he was unsure if Abdul was actually dead. Savage instructed Coleman to find out, and Coleman followed his orders and later confirmed that he saw Abdul kneeled over in his car, his life forever gone. Philadelphia's assistant medical examiner determined that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the head, chest, and abdomen. If you were taking something from Kaboni Savage and he thought you were getting over, he would end your life.
Carlton Brown was another victim of multiple gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Although Brown was a member of the Savage family, Savage suspected Brown of killing Savage's good friend, Ronald Walston. Savage instructed Lewis that he had to do it, which Lewis understood to mean he had to kill Brown. Lewis obeyed, and Brown would die. Lewis would also kill Barry Parker at Savage's direction. It appeared Parker was attempting to take over Stephen Northington's drug corner, so Northington complained to Kaboni Savage, his supplier. He said, "This dude's trying to take over. I can't get no money, Kaboni." And Kaboni said, "Don't worry, we'll handle it." Savage would reply to Northington that nobody come and take nothing, not around here. You have to handle your business. This is what we do. On February 26, 2003, at Kaboni Savage's command, Lewis left Savage's house with Northington, who identified Parker at the drug corner. Lewis then eliminated Northington's competition by shooting Parker several times in the chest. Bang, bang, bang. Have a nice dream. Clearly, Savage did not hesitate to protect his organization by killing those who threatened to interfere with his distribution network. He also had no qualms about murdering those he believed were cooperating with law enforcement. In March of 2003, Savage suspected that Tyrone Tolliver, Coleman's friend, was a snitch. He would tell him, "Yo, bro, he's a rat." When Tolliver had difficulty filling a cocaine order, he looked to Savage to supply him. Although Savage did not have cocaine available, he agreed to help and directed Coleman to take Tolliver to Coleman's apartment, where the organization regularly recompressed cocaine. Bluntly arrived at the apartment shortly thereafter. To Coleman's surprise, Bluntly would shoot Tolliver in the head. At Savage's direction, Bluntly and Coleman disposed of the body. In addition to the benefit of eliminating someone that Kaboni Savage thought was a snitch, the Tolliver murder allowed Savage to put some dirt on Coleman. Coleman knew a lot about Kaboni's operations and organization, and everybody thought Coleman was weak, and if he got into some trouble, that he would tell. Around this same time, in a further effort to assure the loyalty of those closest to him, and to thwart any thoughts his allies might have of cooperating with law enforcement, Savage, along with Lewis and two other high-ranking members of the KSO, made a pact. In short, the men agreed that if any one of them cooperated with law enforcement, our mothers' lives would be in danger. Although Coleman was not present when the deadly pact was made, Kaboni Savage made sure that Coleman learned of it. In 2004, Savage was prosecuted for Lassiter's murder. While jailed awaiting trial, Savage continued to intimidate and threaten others with retaliation if he suspected they were working with the government. First, Savage set his sights on eyewitness Tobias Flowers, the prosecution's main witness. Savage told Lewis, who was also in jail, that he was not worried because Flowers would never make it to court. Savage made similar remarks to another prisoner. Kaboni Savage's prophecy came true when Flowers was killed in a shower of bullets as he sat in his car outside of his aunt's house the night before trial. While there were no eyewitnesses, Northington later told a fellow prisoner of his disdain for snitches and disclosed that he had slumped Flowers and sent him to rat heaven. Savage, too, revealed he had played a part in Flowers' murder, advising the same fellow prisoner that he had spanked the case and he would be released soon. Savage's brutal efforts paid off. Lacking Flowers' testimony, the prosecution foundered and Savage was acquitted of Lassiter's murder. He would see the streets again. He was released from Philadelphia County Prison on April 8, 2004. Freedom never felt so good. Kaboni still had a plan. But within a week, federal authorities arrested him on drug trafficking and other charges. Even while detained, Kaboni Savage continued to direct the operations from his jail cell. He had that kind of power. He was the shot caller, and people still feared him. He was enraged that Coleman, who was also in jail, was assisting the prosecution. He always knew he was weak, but never had a chance to get rid of him. Coleman received threats from other inmates who had connections to Kaboni's organization. While in the visiting room of the prison, Coleman would see Savage's sister, Kadida Savage. She encouraged him not to let these crackers break you, homie. His sister later wrote to Coleman, encouraging him not to reveal anything to federal agents, closing her letter with the statement, "Death before dishonor to your family." Coleman understood that meant that they were threatening his personal family and not members of Kaboni's organization. Later, when Coleman was in a holding cell in the federal courthouse, Kaboni Savage and one of his associates were placed in an adjacent cell. Immediately, Kaboni spoke of killing the rats and told Coleman that his family should die as well. By this time, Kaboni had instructed his sister to have Lewis firebomb Coleman's family home in retaliation for Coleman's cooperation with the government. In a telephone call from prison on the evening of October 8, 2004, Savage spoke with his sister and Lewis. Lewis agreed to do anything that Kaboni ordered, even if it meant killing somebody for him. After the call concluded, his sister relayed to Lewis the directive from Kaboni to firebomb the Coleman house. She instructed Lewis to torch the home late that night when everybody, Coleman's mother and brother, would be there. His sister drove Lewis to the block where Coleman lived and pointed out the house. She also informed him that guns and a pit bull may be inside. Lewis would tell Kaboni's sister that his cousin Robert B.J. Merritt would help him. Kaboni's sister promised Lewis $5,000 for doing the job. Around 4 o'clock a.m. the following morning, Lewis and Merritt took 2 cans filled with gasoline to Coleman's house. Lewis kicked in the door and fired his gun twice. Merritt lit and threw both cans into the house, causing an explosion. Fire then ravaged the structure, resulting in the deaths of all 6 occupants. Coleman's mother, Marcella Coleman, his infant son, Demir Jenkins, his twin brother's 15-year-old son, Sean Rodriguez, his sister, Regina Nash's 12-year-old son, Taja Portia, his cousin, Tamika Nash, whom Coleman regarded as a sister, and Tamika's 10-year-old daughter, Khadija Nash. Acting on Kaboni's sister's instructions, Lewis called her and left a message that Savage's orders had been carried out. He was a savage in all senses. It was not until later that Lewis learned that 4 children had died in the fire. When Lewis confronted Khadija about the children in the house, Khadija responded to Lewis, "Fuck them." Khadija paid Lewis only part of the $5,000 he had been promised. Merritt received a used car and $500. Subsequent recordings of prison conversations between Kaboni Savage and others demonstrated his complicity in the Coleman firebombing. They also revealed Savage's great satisfaction that the killings had taken place, and the intercepted conversations revealed plans to kill yet other witnesses and their families. Savage's continued threats were troubling enough that in February 2007, the U.S. Attorney's Office authorized the Bureau of Prisons to impose special administrative measures, restricting Kaboni's communications with others, including his family. In April 2009, an indictment in the case was returned, naming Savage, Lamont Lewis, Robert Merritt, and Stephen Northington as defendants. In the end, Kaboni would go to trial, and he would be convicted. And it wouldn't take long for the judge to impose the ultimate penalty. The judge would send Kaboni to death row, federal death row, where Kaboni would sit, plotting and wondering if his day would come when he would be put to death. But then would come Joe Biden, the president, who would tell everybody that he doesn't believe in the death penalty, and he would take Kaboni Savage and grant him mercy. Mercy in a way that would give him back his life, although he had no remorse for the lives of others.
Some people might disagree with me, but I do believe that Kaboni Savage was probably the most vicious, most dangerous dude in Philadelphia, right? There'll be people that weigh in and say, "Nah, Chad, what about, the Black Mafia family, and they did some vicious shit." Hey, listen, this dude right here, man, eliminated numerous kids. He had some people go over there and eliminate kids, and you know how I feel. I'm going to ask you to leave a comment. What do you think? Do you think Joe Biden should have released this dude from death row? Do you think that he should have got off of death row, or do you think they should have put him to sleep? And because I'm asking your opinion, sometimes I got to rethink some of the things that I say. And, I've told you guys before, if you do shit to innocent kids, kids are innocent. Old people are innocent. You do bad things to kids, you do bad things to innocent people, maybe they should put you to sleep, right? Kids are innocent, old people are innocent. What kind of world do we live in? And this case has been going on for years. At the end of the day, Kaboni didn't want to die. I read his brief. And in his brief, he's arguing, hey, the death penalty, it's wrong. You shouldn't have the power to kill people. And the court says, you know what? We're not going to address that because that's not what's on the table. That's up to the Supreme Court to decide. We're going to decide on your legal issues. But Kaboni don't want to die. He don't want to be sitting on death row. He still wants to live. What happens to Kaboni Savage, right? Now that he's been granted clemency, now that he's no longer going to be on death row, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. He's going to probably go to the ADX for a little while, and he'll be in population somewhere. How is that even possible? I'm going to tell you how it's possible. Because he's probably not a threat to the safety and security of the BOP or anybody else. That stuff that he did was many, many years ago. Yeah, he was giving out messages, ordering killings through the toilet, all of that type of shit. But, at this point in his life, that's his case. That's what he was arrested for. That's what he's convicted for. He's not in prison, eliminating people. He's not in prison as a shot caller, calling shots, having other dudes eliminate people. And, we live in a country now where locking people in the cell is vicious, in itself. This isn't the Tommy Silverstein days, so to speak. So I think Kaboni Savage probably goes to the ADX for a while. The BOP, he does the right thing over there. The BOP assesses him and they send him back to population. Same type of situation as someone like Mark. Remember we talked about Mark, where he killed a dude in Florence. He goes to the ADX. And eventually they let him out. John Powers, they let him out of the ADX eventually. So sometimes people do get out of the ADX, and I think he will. He'll be one of the people that gets out. Leave a message. Tell me what you think about the death penalty. What do you think about Joe Biden granting clemency to people? Tell me your opinion in the comments. We appreciate you. We'll talk more about this. The other day I did a short video and said, okay, Joe Biden, I respect it. You went big. But I should have been more detailed, but I only did a 60-second short video. So I apologize. And sometimes when you're wrong, you know, you come out here and say, hey, look, you're wrong. I think I am wrong. Some of them cats do deserve to be laid down. You know, Dylan Roof goes into the church and he eliminates old people. Like, come on, bro. These people are in church. They're worshiping. Man, them people don't deserve that. That's somebody's grandmother, man. Them people didn't do nothing to you. You go in there and just, you know, you do stuff like that. The dude at the synagogue, he probably deserves the same. The Boston, like, I mean, yeah, we're going to have to rethink the death penalty and rethink, you know, my thoughts. But when you hurt innocent kids and you hurt old people, yeah, you're probably a bad dude. You know what I mean? Is everybody able to be rehabilitated? We could talk about that on another video because I think there's a lot of people that can. And you know what? I've experienced some of them choskies in different prisons where you're like, wow, these dudes right here, they're probably not the best dudes. But anyway, leave a comment with respect. Blood on the Razor Wire TV. Hope you like this little documentary. We'll be doing more on dudes that were on death row that got off.